All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a podcast episode all about mindfulness.
Mindfulness. Yeah, it seems like it's everywhere these days, right?
It really does. I mean, you see it in like magazines and, apps and everybody's talking about it, but is it all it's cracked up to be?
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
Right, we're going to kind of unpack, what it actually is, why people are saying it's so good for you, and most importantly, how can we actually use it in our daily lives?
Yeah, because it's one thing to, sit on a meditation cushion and do it, but how do we bring it into our crazy busy lives?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of our mission today with this deep dive. But, before we get into, all the specifics, I think it's important to define what we're even talking about. So what exactly is mindfulness?
Yeah, so the podcast that we're looking at uses a definition from John Kabat-Zinn, and, he's kind of considered like the godfather of mindfulness. He brought it into the mainstream.
Okay, so we're going right to the source.
Yeah, and he defines it as the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally.
Okay, that sounds pretty straightforward. I mean, aren't we all kind of aware of what's happening right now?
Well, I mean, think about it. How often are you really focused on what you're doing right now?
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
Our minds are usually, either dwelling on the past or, worrying about the future or thinking about, our to-do lists and all the things we have to do.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that.
Mindfulness is about, kind of training your attention to stay in the present moment.
Okay, so it's not necessarily about like stopping all thoughts altogether. It's more about how we relate to those thoughts.
Exactly. And that's where that, non-judgmental piece comes in.
Yeah, that's the part that always gets me. Like, what does that actually look like, outside of like a meditation practice?
Okay, so think about it this way. Like, let's say you're, rushing to get ready for work and you spill your coffee all over yourself.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
Yeah. And so instead of, freaking out and getting angry at yourself, you just take a breath, you acknowledge what happened, and you move on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you even laugh about it a little bit.
Okay, so it's about not letting those those little disasters kind of derail your whole day.
Right. Exactly.
I like that. But, sometimes I have to admit, mindfulness sounds a little too good to be true.
Yeah.
Like, can simply paying attention really make that much of a difference in our lives?
Well, that's where the research gets really interesting. But, for a long time, people kind of dismissed mindfulness as, this fluffy new age thing.
Yeah, right.
But now we're seeing, more and more studies that show the actual, effects it has on our mental and physical health.
Yeah, the episode we're looking at, it mentioned a couple of studies that I thought were really fascinating.
Oh, yeah, like what?
One that really stuck with me was about mindfulness-based stress reduction.
Oh, yeah. I think it's also called MBSR.
Oh, yeah. MBSR. And it was saying that for some people struggling with anxiety and depression, MBSR was actually as effective as medication.
That's a huge deal.
Yeah, and I think that study was published in JAMA Internal Medicine. So it's, it's not just some anecdotal evidence. This is like real science.
This is like the real deal.
Yeah. So how does that work? Like, how does simply paying attention make such a big difference?
Well, one key factor is self-compassion.
Yeah.
When we're constantly judging ourselves, our stress response system is just on high alert all the time.
Yeah.
And that's exhausting.
It is.
So mindfulness helps to kind of break that cycle by encouraging, a kinder, more accepting inner voice.
So instead of beating ourselves up all the time, we're kind of learning to be a little bit nicer to ourselves.
Exactly. And that could have a huge impact on our stress levels.
Okay, I'm with you there.
Yeah.
But all this talk about brain science is really interesting. But how do we actually do mindfulness?
Yeah.
It can't all be, sitting on a cushion in a silent room.
Right. And luckily it's not.
Okay.
The podcast gives some really good examples of, ways to incorporate mindfulness into our everyday lives.
Okay, let's get into this. I'm all about practical tips. What was the first one?
So the first one was mindful eating.
Okay, so instead of just inhaling our food while we're scrolling through our phones.
Yeah, exactly.
What does mindful eating look like?
So it's about slowing down and actually savoring every bite.
Okay.
Paying attention to the flavors, the textures, even the sounds of your food.
So it's like turning an ordinary meal into a sensory experience?
Exactly.
I can see how that could help you be more in tune with your body's cues as well.
Yeah, like knowing when you're actually full.
Yeah, instead of just eating mindlessly.
Exactly.
Okay, what else? What's next on the list?
So another one they talked about was mindful walking.
Okay, so instead of rushing to get to where we're going.
Yeah, just kind of Being aware of the sensations of your body moving,
Okay.
feeling your feet on the ground,
Hmm.
noticing the sights and sounds around you.
So it's like turning a commute into a moving meditation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I like that.
And, speaking of commutes, which can be stressful,
Oh, yeah.
there's also mindful breathing.
The classic, deep breaths in and out.
Exactly. And that's something you can do anywhere, anytime.
You don't need any fancy equipment.
Just a few moments to focus on your breath.
I feel like I'm already a little bit calmer just thinking about that. Is that something you can do like anytime, not just when you're stressed out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's just a really great way to, bring yourself back to the present moment, no matter what's going on.
Okay, so we've got mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful breathing. What other everyday activities did they talk about bringing mindfulness into?
Um, One that I thought was really interesting was mindful listening.
Mindful listening, okay.
Yeah, think about how often we're only half listening to
Yeah.
someone. We're thinking about what we're going to say next, or we're checking our phones.
Oh, I am so guilty of that,
Right.
especially with like all the notifications and everything.
Yeah, so mindful listening is about you really being present in the conversation.
Okay, so like really hearing what the other person is saying.
Exactly, and not just the words, but their tone of voice, their body language, really trying to understand where they're coming from.
I feel like that could really transform your relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were really practicing mindful listening, I feel like the people you're talking to would feel so much more heard.
Yeah, it's a really powerful way to deepen connection with people.
Wow. Okay. So we've got mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful breathing, mindful listening. What was the last one? The podcast mentioned something about technology, right?
Yes, mindful technology use.
Oh, this is a big one.
Huge, especially these days.
Yeah.
So it's about, instead of letting your phone control your, being more intentional about how and why you're using it.
So like instead of, just mindlessly scrolling through social media for hours.
Yeah, or, constantly checking your email.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, why am I doing this? What am I hoping to get out of it?
So being more mindful of like how we're spending our time and energy.
Exactly.
Okay, I like it. It's like we're taking all these everyday activities and kind of infusing them with this mindful awareness.
Exactly.
But, I still have to admit, I'm a little bit skeptical about this whole mindfulness cures everything.
Yeah, it's not a cure-all for sure.
It just sounds a little too good to be true.
I get that. But the research is pretty remarkable. And it goes way beyond just stress reduction.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Mindfulness can actually have a whole bunch of other benefits too.
Okay, well, let's dive into those. What else can this mindfulness thing do for us?
Well, one of the things that they talked about in the podcast was it can help with things like focus and concentration.
Oh, really? Okay, so instead of like, getting distracted by a million things at once.
Exactly. Mindfulness can help train your brain to stay present, and that can boost your productivity big time.
So like less time scrolling through social media, more time getting things done.
Precisely. And what's interesting? Some research suggests that mindfulness can even enhance creativity.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's not just about like, being more efficient. It's also about unlocking those creative juices.
Yeah, it seems like mindfulness helps us tap into a state of open awareness where we're more receptive to new ideas and perspectives.
So it's like breaking free from those mental ruts and, seeing things in a fresh way.
Exactly.
I like that a lot. But what about decision making? Does mindfulness play a role there too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about how often do we make decisions based on impulse or, when we're feeling really emotional,
Oh, all the time.
right? Mindfulness helps us create space between a stimulus and a response so we can make more thoughtful choices.
So instead of just reacting, we're actually responding.
That's it. And those responses are more likely to align with our values and goals.
That's powerful stuff. And this kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier with emotional regulation, right?
It does. Mindfulness helps us become more aware of our emotions without getting totally swept away by them.
It's like we can see the storm clouds gathering, but we don't have to get caught in the downpour.
Exactly.
But, I used to think that emotional regulation was all about like suppressing your emotions, just like pushing them down and pretending they weren't there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that.
It sounds like mindfulness offers a totally different approach.
It does. It's not about denying or ignoring your emotions. It's about acknowledging them, allowing them to be there, but not letting them control you.
So it's like we're making space for those emotions, but we're not letting them run the show.
Right. And this can be especially helpful when we're dealing with difficult or painful emotions.
So instead of trying to force ourselves to be happy all the time, we're learning to accept the full spectrum of human emotions.
Exactly. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
And that acceptance can be really freeing.
Absolutely. It allows us to move through challenging situations with more grace and resilience.
Okay, so we've talked about how mindfulness can help us focus, be more creative,
Mm.
make better decisions, regulate our emotions. Is there anything this mindfulness thing can't do?
Well, as we said before, it's not a magic cure-all.
Right, right.
But the research on its benefits is pretty amazing, and it goes way beyond just those things we talked about.
Oh, really? Like what else?
One of the most fascinating areas of research is the connection between mindfulness and physical health.
Wait, really? I always thought of mindfulness as something that was mostly about, mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception.
So you're telling me that simply paying attention can actually improve my physical health?
The research suggests that it can.
Okay, I am officially intrigued. What kind of physical benefits are we talking about?
Well, for starters, there's a lot of evidence that mindfulness can help lower blood pressure.
Wow, that's huge. I mean, high blood pressure is a major risk factor for heart disease and stroke.
Exactly.
So it's like mindfulness is giving our cardiovascular system a break.
In a way.
Yes. What else is on the list of physical perks?
Another big one is sleep.
Oh, tell me more about that one. I am a terrible sleeper.
Well, it makes sense when you think about it. We live in a world that's constantly bombarding us with stimulation.
Yeah, it's like our brains never get a chance to shut off.
Right. And that can make it really hard to fall asleep and stay asleep.
Hmm.
But studies have shown that mindfulness practices can actually help calm those racing thoughts and prepare our bodies for a good night's rest.
So it's like hitting the reset button on our sleep-wake cycle.
Yeah, something like that.
Are there any other physical health benefits that the podcast talked about?
They also touched on the impact of mindfulness on the immune system.
Okay, now that's fascinating. How does paying attention make our immune system stronger?
It's not a direct cause and effect,
Mm-hmm.
but some research suggests that mindfulness practices can actually boost the activity of certain immune cells.
So it's like mindfulness is giving our immune system a little extra support.
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
It's amazing to me that something as simple as paying attention can have such a profound impact on our physical health.
It really speaks to the mind-body connection, how intertwined they really are.
This has been so eye-opening. I'm starting to see why mindfulness has become such a buzzword. It's not just some fleeting trend. It's a powerful tool for improving our well-being on so many levels.
I agree with you there.
But I have to admit, all this talk about, all of these benefits, it's starting to make my head spin a little bit.
I hear you. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
It's a lot to take in.
But the main thing to remember is that mindfulness isn't about adding one more thing to your to-do list.
Right.
It's about bringing a quality of awareness to whatever you're already doing.
That's a good reminder. It's not about striving for perfection, it's just about being present.
Exactly.
As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear what resonated most with you from the podcast.
One thing that really stood out to me was the emphasis on non-judgment, as a core principle of mindfulness.
Yeah, I can see why that would resonate. It seems like our culture is so focused on, self-improvement and like always striving to be better.
Right, and that can easily turn into, constant self-criticism.
Totally. So how does mindfulness offer a different perspective on that?
Well, instead of, beating ourselves up for every mistake or, every negative thought we have,
Yeah.
mindfulness encourages us to just observe those thoughts and feelings with a sense of curiosity and acceptance.
So it's not about, pretending everything's perfect or like suppressing those difficult emotions.
Right, it's about acknowledging them, letting them be there, but not getting swept up in that whole judgment spiral.
So it's like, oh, there's that anxious thought again. Hello, anxiety.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. It's like we're creating some space between us and those thoughts and feelings.
Right, and that space allows us to choose how we want to respond rather than just reacting automatically.
It sounds like a much more compassionate way to relate to ourselves.
It is. It's like, how we would treat a friend who was struggling.
Yeah, we wouldn't, berate them for their mistakes.
Exactly.
We'd offer them support and understanding.
Right, and mindfulness helps us to turn that same compassion inward.
I love that. And, I think that shift in perspective can be so powerful because if we're constantly, beating ourselves up, it's hard to make positive changes.
Absolutely. Self-criticism tends to keep us stuck.
Yeah. Whereas non-judgment creates space for growth.
Exactly.
Another thing that I'm really curious to explore further is this whole idea of mindful technology use.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It's something that I definitely struggle with, and I know a lot of our listeners do too.
It's a challenge for sure.
Mm.
Our devices are designed to keep us hooked.
It's like they're these little black holes of attention.
And all that digital stimulation can really take a toll on our well-being.
Yeah, it's like this constant state of low-grade stress.
Right. Leading to feeling overwhelmed, anxious, even burned out.
So how do we break free? How do we create a healthier relationship with technology?
Well, the first step, as with many things in mindfulness, is awareness.
Okay.
Start paying attention to your tech habits.
So like noticing how often you reach for your phone.
Exactly what triggers those impulses and how it makes you feel.
So becoming aware of those unconscious patterns.
Right. And once you start to see those patterns, you can experiment with setting some boundaries.
Okay, so like maybe designating certain times or places as tech-free zones.
Exactly. Or turning off notifications for a few hours each day.
So it's about reclaiming our time and attention.
And being more intentional about how we use these powerful tools.
Wow, this deep dive has been amazing.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much about mindfulness and how we can actually use it in our everyday lives.
Me too.
Yeah.
And, the best part is it's a skill that anyone can develop.
Exactly. It doesn't require any special equipment or, expensive courses.
Just a willingness to pay attention, to be present in this moment.
And to be kind to ourselves.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation.
I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of mindfulness.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we have.
And we hope you'll continue to explore mindfulness in your own lives.
Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.